Yeah.
Let me just point out a couple of things now. A lot of this stuff goes back to the Second World War, right? And, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which divided much of this area. Parts of most of what is Ukraine ended up on the Soviet side of the line.
That's Yalta.
Yeah. Well, no, this is Molotov-Ribbentrop, right? And
before.
Yalta too. If you read Churchill's memoirs, he says, "I was not prepared to make a great squawk about Lemberg." And let's start our story in Lemberg. This is the Western Ukraine, right? This is where this government comes from. As I call it, the Kiev fascist clique. When I say government, I mean this group, right? It's Prime Minister Yatsenyuk and President Turchinov. They are both puppets of Julia Timoshenko, the kleptocrat, the gas princess, who looted the country.
Sure did.
And a failed government from the time of the Orange Revolution in 2004 until she went to jail, essentially, in 2010.
Yeah. Well, we have to take a break. Hold on. We have to take a break, then we'll start. By the way, Yulia was calling for armed intervention on the side of Ukrainians.
She's working through Amanpour of CNN to try to turn the U.S. media in favor of World War III.
Fortunately, the Russians were able to intercept at least one attempted shipment of explosives, 400 kilos of explosives and weapons in a number of automobiles at the Crimea border, and they got those. They were going to be used for car bombs, obviously. Same old M.O. Same old. One other quick note, the Russians, by treaty, folks, if you didn't know, are allowed to have 25,000 troops in the Crimea, and they only had 16,000. That number is still essentially the same. It hasn't changed. Putin is playing this masterfully so far. Back with Webster, and we'll hear his take on this in short form in just a couple minutes. All right, let's get right back to it. Okay, Webster, go right ahead. We're all ears. Have at it.
All right, so look, just a couple of things about history, right? Russia as a whole begins in Kiev. This is the famous 988, the conversion of the ruler of Kiev and Ukraine, I guess, but Kiev, to Orthodox Christianity. So that's the Christianization of Russia, 988. And from 988 until about 1240, the coming of Genghis Khan and the Mongols, this was an independent entity, a state. But from then on, it went under the Mongol yoke, so it disappears for quite a few centuries. And when it comes out, this is largely because of the efforts of the Grand Dukes of Moscow and then later of the Russian Empire. And there was a Khan of the Crimea. This was a separate thing under Mongol rule until quite late in the day. Okay, so it's a very important thing to note that this is sort of where Russia started. Right? So there's in addition to all the other kinds of importance, there's this importance too. That there's a great feeling in Russia that this should not fall under anti-Russian auspices, which is unfortunately what the current government is. The second thing is the origin of these fascists that we see in the public square goes back to World War II. And when the Nazis came through with Barbarossa and were attacking the Soviet Union, there was a significant group of Ukrainians who decided to support them, right? And these were people who had been under the Russian Empire. Some of them had been under the Habsburg Empire. Some of them had been under Prussia even, right? But they gravitated towards a guy called Stefan Bandera. And Bandera was the leader of a kind of an SS division, the Galicia division of the Nazi SS, and they fought against the Soviets. After that, when the war was over, Bandera escaped. He went to Munich and became part of the Radio Free Europe complex. And according to quite a few, he was an assassination bureau. He directed the assassination of key leaders in the Soviet Ukraine now, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republics. People wonder why Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine. Well, he was sort of from Ukraine himself, Brezhnev too, more or less, and they wanted to gratify Ukrainians and get them to turn away from these terrorists, I guess we'd have to say, operating for NATO. So the problem that you have now is that of the parties that are in the current government, right? You have the Fatherland government, the Fatherland Party. That's the President Turchinov and the Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. These are basically straight sort of business suit IMF agents, right? But in addition to them, there are two other parties that are really the places where this Nazi nostalgia is the most prominent. And one is the so-called Svoboda Party, or Freedom Party. And this is led by a guy called Oleg, or Oleg. People who have some idea of Russian should just be aware that the G in Russian tends to turn into an H in Ukrainian, as it does even in southern Russia to some extent. But this is a guy called Chanibok. He's the head of the party. And he's written up in all kinds of European studies of modern fascism, extreme right-wing, racist politics. He's anti-Russian, anti-Semitic, anti-Polish, anti-foreigner, and we'll go through some of the people in his party. But this is the big Bandera party. And then, even more extreme and even more in the mob, right, the Kiev fascist mob that we've seen, is this right sector. And we just mentioned a couple of things about both of these. But let's just look at Svoboda, because you see the line of the new government coming from Turchinov and the president and Yatsenyuk, the prime minister, is that there is no problem of extreme right-wingers in this government. And indeed, they say there are no fascists in Ukraine. They just don't exist. But they do. And here's who they are. The Chanibok party includes him. And again, you'd have to assume that anybody who's in that party is automatically xenophobic, hates Russia, hates the Jews, hates the Poles. They actually hate the Germans, although they submerge this, right, to various practical purposes. But it gets into the power ministries, right? We should just look at these power ministries. Who's, for example, the defense minister? Well, the defense minister is a guy called Tenyuk, and he comes from the Ukrainian Navy, and he's a member of Svoboda. So if you're in Moscow, how would you like to have the defense minister of Ukraine being somebody who is in a political party that's openly in the tradition of Stefan Bandera? And they even have this thing called the Wolfsangel, which is a runic sign, and it's obviously their version of the swastika, and that's their flag. Okay, you might say, well, maybe he's not the only one in the party. Let's look at the National Security and Defense Council. Who do we find there? Here we find a guy called Parubi, and he's in the Svoboda, Bandera, SS, Galicia division. And then even worse, a guy called Yarosh. And Yarosh is, again, he's the heart and soul of the mob. This is somebody who went to fight alongside the Chechen terrorists against the Russians in Chechnya in the 1990s. And this is the guy, Yarosh is the one who, over the weekend, put out a call to the Chechen terrorist leader, Doku Umarov, saying, we fought for you in the past, now you have to join us, we have to attack the Russians, this is a great chance for us, right, so you should join in because we need you. Russia has said that they are seeking an Interpol warrant for international terrorism against this guy Yarosh, and I think that's fully justified. Now, the press service of this right sector says, oh no, that was a hacker who put that up there. Well, I'm afraid that will not solve the problem, because if we look a little bit further into this right sector, again, in the government, the deputy of this guy Yarosh, or one of his brigade commanders, I guess as they say, is a real horrendous thug by the name of Alex Muzichko. And Muzichko has said he will spend his life and die fighting against Jews, Russians, and communists. That's his creed. And he also went to take part in the Chechen war against Russia. And when we come back, I can tell you his scorecard that he talks about all the time, how many Russians he killed fighting alongside Prince Bandar's terrorists in Chechnya.
Including children, no doubt. What a group of vile human beings.
That's who's going to get your money.
Yeah, for sure. That's right. Hold on a minute, and Webster and I will be right back with this unique overview of who's who in Ukraine. Okay, back with Webster and learning a lot as always. Go ahead, Webster.
So,
okay, we've gone through a rogues gallery of killers. So you were going to tell us about this.
Couple of more.
But before you did that, he was in Chechnya. You were going to tell us about his scorecard.
Yeah, he says he goes his standard stump speeches. He says, "I fought alongside the terrorists there in Chechnya, killing Russians, and I was personally responsible for destroying 3 tanks, 3 armored personnel carriers, and an artillery piece." And that's sort of his stump speech. If you look on the internet, there's a tape of him beating up a district attorney while the police stand around because they're so afraid because this guy has a phalanx of machine gun toting hoodlums in ski masks. So that's Muzichko. So that's
right.
Yarosh. Again, Yarosh is on the committee that controls the defense ministry and the armed forces. So you got Yarosh, you got Muzichko. A third guy from the right sector, and again, this is the heart of the actual mob, Tarasenko, and he wants Ukraine to be a nuclear power, right? When the Soviets collapsed, quite a few ICBMs and other missiles were left in Ukraine, and they kept them, and then these were gradually removed through various treaties, with the U.S. pressing them to get rid of them. Tarasenko says he wants these nuclear weapons back. Now, again, look at those hooligans you saw in the Kiev fascist mob, and ask yourself, do you want to have them with ICBMs, right? Wouldn't it be more dangerous than the other proliferation scenarios that we're always supposed to be so afraid of, right? The State Department is so concerned about Iran, which I don't think is concerning at all, but in this case, the Ukrainian proliferation problem seems to attract no attention whatsoever. Tarasenko also wants to grab territory away from Poland. This is really interesting because Poland has been a patron of the Kiev fascist mob, and this is how he thanks them. In other words, this is this explosive combination that we see. So, a couple of others. In terms of social policy, there's a guy called Sich, or maybe just Sick, and Sick is the deputy prime minister. Mm-hmm. His view is that rape is always caused by women. The lifestyle of women is the principal cause of rape, and the answer is ban all abortions, says Sick. Then we have, there's a guy called Schweika, and the good soldier Schweika is also from the Svoboda party. How about this? He's the food minister. So suppose you're a Russian and you're looking to get some food and you realize that you're going to have to get it from the good soldier Schweika. Yeah. Similarly, another member of this gaggle is a woman called Chernobyl. I call her Chernobyl. Chernobyl, that's also in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. She's the anti-corruption minister. And again, she's going to come after you and say, oh, you're a Russian, are you? Well, then you're going to be indicted.
And we're paying indeed, for all these people. This is
you are. Again, USAID has already put in $5 million. Mm-hmm. This guy, Olmidyar, right, mm-hmm. the one who pays for Scahill and our dear friend Greenwald, he has invested in. I'm sure others have. The oligarch who contributed most to the revolution is the chocolate king. He's a guy called Poroshenko. And the chocolate part is very interesting because we can't really go into this now. There is a world chocolate cartel, along with grain and along with a few other things. This is an old institution. It's run, the center of it is Cadbury Fry in London, but if you're a chocolate manufacturer, you're likely to be somehow a part of this chocolate thing. And he's the one who was paying the fascist mob the $25 a day stipends to stay in the square that kept them going. Now, the answer of the pro-Maidan forces to this kind of a lineup, right? And I could go on. I could give you a few more. They say,
got the idea.
Oh, that's only 5,000 of the most active ones in the square, right? That are fascist. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but wait, the whole thing was only 20 to 30,000 if they were lucky, right? And then they say, well, it got up to 200,000 or 300,000. Yeah, on 1 or 2 days, right? When it was
out of 45 million.
Yeah, out of 45 million. So this has got time bombs under it. The first thing is the IMF austerity program, which Yanukovych was smart enough to turn away from. Yatsenyuk, the prime minister, and Turchinov, the president, both of them tools of the gas princess, they say, brace yourself, gang, harsh austerity coming down.
So one of the first things they talked about was austerity.
That's the first thing, right? That's the first thing they said. It's going to be really rough. One of the things is there's a state subsidy, government subsidy on gas in a place that's pretty cold. They're going to remove the subsidy. So the price of gas is going to triple, quadruple. That's already going to make them hated. Yatsenyuk says his job is a suicide mission, I guess, the kamikaze mission. The other thing, though, is the IMF wants to cut pensions, cut health care for old people, cut health for children, devalue the currency, right? The entire IMF catalog is now going to be inflicted on these poor people. And,
that's right.
You know, that's the effect of this revolution. The other thing is the rivalry. Timoshenko obviously wants to be president. The other person who wants to be president is the Palooka, right? You've seen him, this huge guy, Klitschko.
Newland's boy.
She didn't want him in the government. She wanted Yatsenyuk should be in the government because he's a great
No, she wanted to marginalize him. She wanted to move him aside. That was the phone call. I'll take care of
Klitschko would be available for the presidency as a pure puppet.
Correct.
Because he's brain damaged. In other words, he's the heavyweight champion of the world.
Drunk.
He can't speak. He can't, it's just impossible. He has been shut out. In other words, Klitschko, he leads this thing called the Punch Party, Udar.
That's funny.
The Punch Party. He's absorbed too many of these.
Yeah.
Now look, in brief, what should happen? Well, obviously, the U.S. should butt out. We don't want any part of this. This has nothing to do with the U.S.
Of course.
The aid that Kerry has offered should never be delivered. And I would say the other thing is to defund this USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, Albert Einstein Institute. This apparatus of color revolutions, has gotten subcontracting from these people. These people have to be defunded, right? So you have to butt out of this whole racket of color revolutions, because this is now the second phase of the color revolution of 10 years ago. What's the actual solution? I would say Finlandization. Back in the 50s and 60s, Finland, of course, had been an active ally of Hitler, and they had joined in the attack on the Soviet Union. But the Soviets at that point said, look, Finland, you can remain sovereign country, independent, run your own stuff, but you're going to be neutral, you're not going to join NATO, you're not going to join the European Union, and you're not going to tolerate political parties that promulgate hatred of the Soviets or revenge or, changing the borders or taking back territory. You're going to cool it. And Finland did, I think, relatively well under that. I think that would be the sensible solution for Ukraine. And indeed, part of this Finlandization treaty, of course, was that Finland had to give back territory to the Soviets that they had taken during the Nazi war, right, during Barbarossa. This had to be restored. So I think the package would be something like transfer the Crimea back to Russia, certain other places like Kharkov and Donetsk and this Dnipropetrovsk, where the big dam is located, and some others. Yeah. Send this back. As a matter of fact, the Dnieper River might be a good border between the two.
That's the obvious border.
I guess so. But that may well be the modern ethnic border, although there's a lot of Russians all the way over to Odessa, right?
Well, they're going to have to move.
The other port. Anyway, the main thing, though, is whatever the border is, that can be worked out. But the concept of Finlandization, that you've got to have the ability to suppress hotheads. In other words, you can't allow the U.S. to run wild, and of course the way that the current situation occurred was you had the foreign minister of Germany, foreign minister of France, foreign minister of Poland, under the auspices of Merkel and of Ashton, going in there and getting Yanukovych, right, the former president, to sign this suicidal deal where he basically gave in everything. Correct. And at that point his police forces collapsed.
Correct. Absolutely right.
So, okay, stay out.
We got a minute here or two. Shooting, bombs, Are they going to provoke the Russians into retaliating?
Well, that is the problem. You might say that the Crimea seems to have been pacified, but these places that I'm mentioning, Kharkov and Donetsk, are areas where the anti-fascist sentiment is very strong.
Right.
But they're not in provinces. They're not where the Russians have bases, and they're not in provinces that are on this super autonomy or secession.
Hard to defend, yeah.
Harder to defend, and just today, right? We had I think it was the city hall of Kharkov was held by the anti-Kiev forces in the morning. Then the fascists came in, took it over for a while. Then they were kicked out by nightfall, and that might turn into gunfire at any point. But the main thing is, don't follow Kerry down this path. Indeed, I think it's clear that Kerry, my call to impeach Kerry of Skull and Bones is repeated and even more relevant than in the past.
I look, unfortunately, for this to turn to bloodshed very soon, manipulated by the West to force the Russians to react militarily.
Yes, and indeed, we have the company that seems to represent the continuity of Blackwater has been shipping people into Kiev, and they've then been going south.
Oh, really?
East.
Oh,
yes.
They're already on the move.
And there are even stories about Israelis moving in.
Yeah, well, they're everywhere.
And being part of this. So whatever does happen, figure that some of this may also be mercenaries on
Count on it. Absolutely.
The Western
Come on.
or
If
NATO
we didn't learn
side.
from Syria and Libya, we didn't learn anything. Mercenaries, high level, special forces, you name it. Dirtbag mercenaries, they're all over the place.
But no military solution, Finlandization.
Yep. Well said. Good job. Thank you very much for sharing.
See you soon, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.